Good evening, I'm Jim Lara. On the NewsHour tonight, the news of this Wednesday, then a report on the Federal Reserve decision to cut interest rates. 2 politics stories, what the presidential candidate said today, and a look at potential voting problems at the polls. An update on the fighting in Afghanistan by New York Times correspondent John Burns, and a media unit report on the revolution and how we get the word.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer is provided by...
The world is changing, and how we use energy today cannot be how we use it tomorrow. There is no one solution. It's not simply more oil, more renewables, or being more efficient. It's all of it. Our way of life depends on developing all forms of energy and to use less of it. It's time to put our differences aside. Will you be part of the solution? Chevron, human energy.
Pacific Life. Vestas. The Atlantic Philanthropies. And with the ongoing support of these institutions and foundations. And
this program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The Federal Reserve cut a major interest rate again today. It was the Fed's latest effort to thaw out credit and slow the slide into recession. The central bank cut its target rate for overnight loans between banks by another half point to just 1%. A statement said the Fed acted because the pace of economic activity appears to have slowed markedly. China cut interest rates today as well. Major European banks are expected to act later this week. The stock market rallied on the Fed announcement, then lost it all in the closing minutes. The Dow Jones Industrial Average ended up falling 74 points to close just below 89.91. The NASDAQ rose more than 7 points to close at 1657. World stock indexes were mostly higher today, with gains of 7 to 9%. The U.S. market also got a boost today from an unexpected quarter. The Commerce Department reported a surprise jump in orders for durable goods in September. It was the largest gain in 3 months. And General Motors stock rose on reports it resolved the major issues in talks to buy Chrysler. In the presidential race with just 6 days to go, Democrat Barack Obama planned a 30-minute primetime TV commercial. 2 major networks and several cable channels were set to air it. Republican John McCain campaigned in Florida. He said Obama has not shown he has what it takes to protect America. We'll have more on the campaign later in the program tonight. Iraq today outlined proposals to change a draft security deal with the U.S. They included a ban on using Iraq territory to strike neighboring countries. A government spokesman in Baghdad said, "The Americans must realize that these changes are necessary to persuade the people to accept the agreement." In Washington, President Bush said he's optimistic about finishing the Status of Forces Agreement, known as the SOFA.
We received amendments today from the government. We're analyzing those amendments. We obviously want to be helpful and constructive without undermining basic principles. And I remain very hopeful and confident that the SOFA will get passed.
The leading Shiite religious official in Iraq voiced concern about that security pact today. In a statement, Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani said the draft must do more to protect Iraq's sovereignty. Syria demanded an apology from the U.S. today over a Sunday raid that killed 8 people. The helicopter assault happened just inside Syria, near the border with Iraq. It's been reported an al-Qaeda leader was killed. The Syrians insisted again all of the victims were civilians. The government of Pakistan today formally protested U.S. missile strikes inside its territory. It demanded an immediate end to recent attacks on militants near the Afghan border. The Pakistanis say the strikes are killing civilians and hurting support for the war on terror. U.S. commanders may call for doubling the additional troops into Afghanistan. It was widely reported today the number could rise to 20,000 as planners appeal for more support units. Pentagon spokesman Jeff Morrell acknowledged the deployment could increase. He would not confirm numbers. The U.S. already has more than 31,000 troops in Afghanistan, and will have more on Afghanistan later in the program tonight. Rebels in Congo declared a ceasefire today after 3 days of fighting. It was the latest violence to rack the African nation in recent years. The truce affected the eastern city of Goma as government forces and UN peacekeeping troops fell back. We have a report narrated by Lindsay Hilsum of Independent Television News.
Congolese government helicopter gunships fired on rebel positions north of Goma today, but to little avail. At Kibumba, the troops just milled around. They're losing and they know it. They claim that it's not just the rebels firing on them, but that shots are coming from across the border, from Rwanda.
You can see for yourselves, the border's over there. All the firing is coming into the Congo from there. It can't be from anywhere but Rwanda.
Government troops retreated south down the road. They're failing to protect tens of thousands fleeing their homes. Today, people left the camp at Kibumba and started to flee towards Goma. As the refugees searched for somewhere to shelter, government troops were in full-scale retreat, abandoning the town to its fate, expecting the rebel army of Laurent Nkunda at any time. The UN forces can't cope. They're supposed to keep the peace, not fight a war. The Security Council is meeting today, but who wants to send more troops to this intractable conflict?
Is it possible to send some other forces? I don't know, really. All the nations are very reluctant because it has been done, and last time it was with a French and Belgian initiative, Artemis operation, very successful for 3 months or 4 months. Is it possible to repeat?
Some 45,000 people are on the move. The situation is so dangerous, it's hard for aid workers to get to them and provide the help needed.
The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon warned today the violence has spawned a humanitarian crisis of catastrophic dimensions. The U.S. Justice Department today approved a merger between Delta and Northwest Airlines. The decision means the last hurdle to the deal is a lawsuit by air passengers in San Francisco. The combined carrier would operate under the Delta name and become the world's largest airline. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now, the Fed's rate cut. Today in the presidential campaign, potential election day problems, John Burns on Afghanistan, and the media revolution. Today's Federal Reserve decision to cut interest rates again. Here to explain the whats and whys of that action is Krishna Guha, Chief U.S. Economics Correspondent for the Financial Times. Krishna, welcome. Remind us again what specific rate it was that was cut today.
So, Jim, this is the Fed funds rate. It's the basic underlying interest rate in the economy. It was 1.5%. The Fed cut it by 0.5 percentage point. It's now 1%.
And the reasoning behind that was what?
Well, the Fed's going all out to try to offset some of the severe tightening in credit conditions that's happened over the last couple of months with all the turmoil in the financial sector. By reducing the interest rate, it hopes to bring down the actual cost of borrowing for people like you and me and for companies out there in the economy.
Well, give us the Ripple scenario, the good scenario that they're hoping for, that this happened today, and what will happen in sequence after that.
Well, Jim, every loan in the economy is essentially made up of two halves. There's the underlying risk-free rate. That's the rate the Fed sets, now 1%. And then there's a risk premium. That's the extra you pay because you're a riskier or less risky borrower. The Fed's trying to tackle both of these elements. It's reducing the underlying rate. That's what it did today. And it's also trying to hammer down those risk spreads in the economy. That's why it's doing all these new and often unconventional lending operations.
Now, is it possible to go below 1%? In other words, is there any more give in this operation?
Well, the answer is yes. And here's how it works. If at some point the Fed gets to zero interest rates and wants to ease policy further, it obviously can't go negative. But what it can do is try to bring down interest rates on the longer term. You see, the Fed funds rate, the interest rate we always talk about, that's an overnight rate. It's a rate to borrow for a day. But if that rate goes down to zero, it probably still costs money to borrow, let's say, for 3 months or 2 years. So what the Fed would do is it would start to target longer-term interest rates in the economy, try and target the 3-month rate or the 2-year rate, thus making the overall set of borrowing costs in the economy cheaper.
Yeah. And the whole point of this is to cause people to loan money again, right? Everybody in the chain, right? And what's the evidence that any of this up till now was working, or is there any?
Well, the evidence is frankly limited. If you talk to people inside the Fed, what they'll tell you is, look, if we hadn't done this stuff, everything would have been much, much worse. And that's probably true. They've been able to offset what's happened in the markets, this extraordinary credit crisis, to some degree, but they haven't been able to get credit flowing in normal ways to households, to businesses, to keep the economy growing. Top Fed officials will tell you today they don't think that interest rates alone can do it anymore. And that's why they were very keen supporters of the federal government's rescue plan, including injecting capital into the banks to make them stronger. If the banks are stronger, they should feel more confident about lending, and they should also feel more confident about doing business with each other.
And late today, in another action, the Treasury Department did put money into 9 banks, right, of $250 billion, something like that?
Well, the Treasury is indeed putting money into a wide number of banks, including some 8 or 9 large banks, the key systemically important banks, the biggest national banks, the ones it can't afford to let go under. But it's also providing capital for smaller banks, including some community banks.
All right, now finally the impossible question, Krishna. How do you explain Wall Street's reaction to this? As you know, it was very level this morning, and then boom, it suddenly went up over 200 points, and then the last few minutes it fell down 74 points, a 74-point loss. You got an explanation, sir?
Well, half an explanation.
Okay.
No one really understands what's going on with the markets right now. Look, the markets are incredibly volatile at the moment. That means they bounce around, and it's partly a combination of fear and greed. People are terrified as to what could still happen to the economy, but at the same time, they see stocks as being really beaten down and potentially offering a lot of profit in the long haul. So the mood swings from one to the other. Trading is also thin, and that means that stocks can bounce up and bounce down. But when we look at today's trading, we should put it in context. The market went up by 10% yesterday, and it was basically give or take flat today. That's not a bad development. A lot of people were thinking that after yesterday's bounce, we might have a slump today. We didn't get it. So some modest reassurance from the market today, I think.
Okay, Krishna, I'll take your word for it. That's good news, semi, right?
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Now, with just 6 days to go until Election Day, the candidates campaign in Florida and North Carolina, and Judy Woodruff has our campaign report.
After starting the day talking about taxes, John McCain turned to national security this afternoon in Tampa, Florida, where he attempted to paint Democrat Barack Obama as unprepared to lead.
My fellow Americans, we're going to get through this economic crisis. We will get through it, and we will even come out stronger without the corruption and arrogance that have overtaken both Washington and Wall Street. We're going to pull through these hard times and do it together, just as our country has done before. But when that day arrives and the worries of financial crisis have fallen away, we will find awaiting our country all of the same great challenges and dangers that were there all along. They mattered before the economic turmoil of the present. They will matter still when it is past. And in a time of war, in a moment of danger for our country and the world, let it not be said of us that we lost sight of these challenges. The terrorists still plotting new strikes across the world, Millions of innocent lives are still at stake, including American lives. Our enemy's violent ambitions must still be prevented by American vigilance, by diplomacy and cooperation with our partners, and by force of arms as a last resort. In his 4 years in the Senate, 2 of them spent running for president, Barack Obama has displayed some impressive qualities. But the question is whether this is a man who has what it takes to protect America from Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and other grave threats in the world. And he has given you no reason to answer in the affirmative.
The Obama campaign rejected McCain's attack in a statement saying, "When the next president is tested, the American people can have John McCain's judgment of siding with George Bush and Dick Cheney on every major national security decision, or they can have the steady leadership and sound judgment of Barack Obama that has earned the support of Americans like General Colin Powell." McCain's running mate, Sarah Palin, was in Toledo, Ohio this morning, focusing on energy independence. She accused the Democratic ticket of resisting alternatives to foreign oil, such as clean coal, nuclear power, and offshore drilling.
Technology has come such a long way. Again, they don't get it. They need to understand the science behind all of this today. And those cleaner, safer technologies are far likelier to be used in the U.S. and in Canada than in China or India or other developing nations. It's here. Well, they will be produced in environmentally friendly manners and protecting the workers. Much more likely here than in these developing countries. So policies that forego domestic production don't protect our environment. They simply accelerate and reward dirtier and more dangerous methods of production elsewhere in countries that apply few, if any, environmental or workplace safeguards. While our opponents like to posture as defenders of the environment, in practice, their refusal to support more domestic production does nothing more than harm. It ultimately harms our environment. It doesn't do any good.
The Democratic ticket's number 2, Joe Biden, campaigned in Jupiter, Florida, where he said protecting Social Security was a key element to strengthening the middle class.
It also means ensuring retirement for those of you who have put everything of your lifetime into working hard and playing by the rules. And now look at your 401ks, now look at where your investments are, and people find themselves in trouble. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if, in fact, Social Security had been in the stock market? Can you imagine now, the last couple months, if Bush and McCain had succeeded in privatizing Social Security? Well, folks, here's what Barack and I believe. We believe there should be no privatization of Social Security.
Barack Obama began his day in Raleigh, North Carolina, where he said the McCain campaign had given up a focus on the economy and was resorting instead to negative attacks.
They don't want to talk about the economy. That's what you want to talk about. That's what affects your lives day in and day out. Now, because he knows that his economic theories don't work, he's been spending these last few days calling me every name in the book. Lately, he's called me a socialist for wanting to roll back the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans so we can finally give tax relief to the middle class. I don't know what's next. By the end of the week, he'll be accusing me of being a secret communist because I shared my toys in kindergarten. I shared my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Look, that's his choice. That's the kind of campaign he chooses to run. But you have a choice too. The fundamental question in this election is not, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? We know the answer to that. The fundamental question is, will we be better off 4 years from now? Now, for 8 years, we've seen Washington take care of the extremely well-off and the extremely well-connected. And now my opponent's making the same arguments to justify the same old policies that have been a complete failure for the middle class. John McCain wants to give more to billionaires, more to corporations that ship jobs overseas, more to the same people whose greed and irresponsibility got us into this crisis in the first place. And we're here because we know they shouldn't get away with it anymore. We don't need another president who fights for Washington lobbyists and Wall Street. We need a president who stands up for hard-working Americans on Main Street, and that's what I intend to be.
From there, Obama traveled to Florida, where he planned to meet up with Biden for an early Vote for Change rally in Sunrise this evening.
Good morning. Make it a little bit easier if you have your ID out.
In fact, many in the Sunshine State are voting early, more even than officials expected.
Some of those lines have lasted between 4 hours to 6 hours. And those are really unconscionably long lines.
More than 10% of registered voters in Florida have already cast their ballot. Those record lines prompted Governor Charlie Crist to declare a state of emergency yesterday to extend polling hours. And Florida is not alone. Record turnouts are reported across the country in the more than 30 states that allow some form of early voting.
The wait is ridiculous, and they should have more voting booths inside.
There have also been instances of malfunctioning voting machines. Many states put them in place after the 2000 election.
It's frustrating when we've bought new equipment for this, and we are having some problems that didn't show up at all during the testing.
In West Virginia, Tennessee, and Texas, there are reports the voting machines have switched votes.
I would feel safer.
Democrats and Republicans in some counties are urging voters to use paper ballots to create a trail for a potential recount.
It's just a matter of having a really fair and honest election.
Thousands of lawyers from both campaigns are amassing in battleground states. And there are already lawsuits. The NAACP sued Virginia Governor Tim Kaine, saying the state was unprepared to deal with a record-breaking turnout.
We need to ensure that there are no shenanigans with this election. We saw what happened in 2000 and in 2004, and we've said not on our watch in Virginia.
Kaine defended the state's readiness and said Virginia is better equipped this year than in 2004. In Colorado and Georgia, watchdog groups have raised concerns about the state's purging voter registrations.
I'm not dead and I haven't moved, so why did this happen? And they said they didn't know.
There have also been some attempts to over-register voters. The Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, or ACORN, came under fire in Ohio recently for submitting fraudulent registration cards.
Now, Gwen Ifill takes a closer look at those potential voting problems.
And for that look, we go to two attorneys who have been intimately involved in the process. Barbara Arnwine, Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, a voting rights group, and election lawyer Benjamin Ginsburg. He served as national counsel to the Bush-Cheney presidential campaigns in 2000 and 2004. He's also on standby, if needed, to join a post-election McCain recount team. So we'll be talking about that in a moment, but I want to start with Barbara Arnwine. Under a week to go before the election, are we ready?
No. I think that, states are doing the best that they can, but with a record turnout and the continued underinvestment by our states and by our federal government in election procedures, that we are not ready yet. I wish that I could say to every voter that every registration roll is accurate, that every voting place you go to will have working machines, that you won't have to wait long. None of that is unfortunately true. So what I would like to say is that we are making reforms. I think the fact that 36 states have early voting is in fact a major progress, and that's a sign that states are beginning to think about how to open up the process more, how to be more efficient. But we still have a long ways to go to make sure that we have greatly and well-trained poll workers who are heroes for volunteering to do what they do for such low pay, and to make sure that voters are able to cast a vote and have it counted.
Ben Ginsburg, are we ready?
No, we're not. I agree with Barbara about that. It's a system that's built on a couple of things. Number one, it is a human system. We have basically volunteers, very well-intentioned people who work the polls every day, every election day, and that creates the natural problems that come from human error. And secondly, I disagree with Barbara a little bit on this. Most decisions about the types of machines and the way ballots are cast and counted are really made on the county level. And so you have a great deal of inconsistency amongst the counties in a given state, to say nothing of between the states.
So if we say that we're not ready, let's give the viewers some understanding of where and how and why. It would be easy to imagine that since 2000 and 2004, after everything that we went through, that some of the problems would have been identified and fixed by now.
Yes, unfortunately, the Help America Vote Act, what people call HAVA, did not go far enough. I mean, it was just a little Band-Aid over a huge, gaping sore. And what I think that we need to do is to continue with good election reform to address the problems. The biggest problem right now is that HAVA requires that every state creates a statewide database for this election, and they have to match it against, your DMV records and against the Social Security records. Unfortunately, human error is human error, so records aren't matching. And what that's leading to is that states are not putting people on registration lists, or partisans are flagging these voters and trying to, challenge those voters at the polls. These are the issues that, unfortunately, are there for us. I think that these are issues that shouldn't exist. I really question why we are not like other democracies. Most Western democracies, when you turn 18, you automatically are registered. You do not have to go through this entire process of tracking down, constantly registering, losing your registration if you move, all these problems. You become a permanent registrant in that country.
Let me ask Ben Ginsburg this question, because there seems to be a disagreement on partisan lines about what the real problem is here, whether it's a problem that voter registration is flawed or that voter access is flawed. Which is it?
Well, I think it's both in a lot of ways. I think that there are problems in keeping track of people in our society because we move so much. We're such a mobile society, far more so than really any other country. And because we do have such local elections, and it is important to have our elected officials on the local level elected by folks who live in their areas. So you do have to have accurate registration rolls in order to have some validity to the system, to allow people to have a degree of confidence in the validity of the results that come from elections. Now, in terms of access, that's a problem that we tend to deal with mostly when we see a problem largely through a recount. And what's frightening about doing recounts is that you realize just how flawed every election must be, because once you dig down in a recount, all the problems with rolls and access materializes, and you see it.
Well, so how much of the problems that we're seeing are systemic, as you described, and how much of it is just people setting out to game the process? How much of it's on purpose?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a lot of problems with that. I mean, right here in Virginia, already the flyers have started, the deceptive flyers, telling people that they can vote on Wednesday.
After the election.
Exactly. Those flyers are already in the Tidewater area. They're already in Richmond. People are calling. They're complaining. They're confused. And the flyers are really vicious. I mean, they look very official. They have the seal of the state. And they say, to voters that the state General Assembly met and made this decision because of the fact that the lines were going to be too long at the polls. So it's a very, very vicious way of discouraging voters from showing up.
Have you seen the same sort of thing?
Sure, there are flyers. They actually affect both Democratic communities and Republican communities, so that certainly exists. Your piece referred to ACORN and its registration of voters. That's a problem when people try and register falsely. But the larger problem is that we have two sides of the same coin. Republicans talk about fraud. Democrats talk about suppression. It has really become, and there are isolated incidents of it on both sides they can point to, but it has also sort of seeped into the get out the vote programs that both parties use to motivate their bases. That leads to a lack of confidence in the system, and that's sort of a long-term systemic problem.
We just saw in Judy's piece the long lines of people lining up to vote early. I read one report, 1/3 of voters are actually voting early this time. Is that necessarily, you were saying it's a good thing, but is it necessarily a good thing if it creates potential for more confusion?
Well, I think early voting now has been used by some states for, several elections, and they have, functioned very well. I think that early voting takes care of many problems. I mean, if you're a mother and you have to take a child to school and you have to be at work.
But does it create more problems as well?
No, I don't think so. I haven't seen any evidence of that, because think about it. If all those people were showing up for one day of voting, if you got 4-hour lines already, what kind of hour lines would you have on one day if that was the only option? It's very good for people to be able to vote on a Saturday. Very good for people to be able to vote absentee. It's very good to have these options for voting, and they've worked so effectively. It's really made a big difference in turnout and in registration.
Early voting, a help or a hindrance?
Oh, I think on balance, it's a help. I think anytime you allow more people access to the voting system, that's good. You need to, it does create more problems, and it prolongs the problems in the sense that there is a longer period of time when folks may have to be standing online. It does put more stress on the counties and the volunteers because they have to work more days. But on balance, increasing access to the voting booth is really what it ought to be about.
Technology. Is there a way for technology to solve some of the problems or anticipate some of the problems which we're facing on Election Day?
After a number of years. I mean, we're not there yet. I think, Nevada has it almost right. But not all the systems do.
What does Nevada do?
Nevada has a really nice system. If you've been watching, they actually have polling places in malls. They have polling places so accessible, and people are able to just go and vote, and it's making a huge difference because people are finding that it's easier to vote in these common places where you frequent anyway. But the technology is catching up a little bit, where it's able to both be electronic and print out some kind of paper ballot.
And Ben Ginsberg, as I mentioned at the start here, you are standing by in case you need to do a recount for the McCain campaign, as you did for the Bush campaign. Is a legal challenge inevitable no matter what happens Tuesday night?
Oh, I don't think it necessarily is. I mean, historically, you get a presidential recount about once every 126 years or so. So I think we ought
maybe
not
a recount, but it's any other kinds of challenges.
Oh, there will be legal challenges. As has been reported frequently, there are lots of lawyers who are out for both parties in the polling places. They are a touch over-caffeinated, especially early in the morning. There may be challenges that take place. So I think that has now become ingrained in the system. That's not necessarily bad because it does provide sort of a check and balance on the charges that have now become part of the political process.
Ben Ginsberg and Barbara Arnwine, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
There's more about voting problems on our website. You can also learn about our Election Day experiment with YouTube called Video Your Vote. We're asking people to film their voting experience and document any problems they may encounter. For more information and to participate, go to pbs.org and then scroll down to NewsHour Reports. And now to that war that won't go away. Ray Suarez has our story.
It's been 7 years since the U.S. invaded Afghanistan in October 2001 following the 9/11 attacks. But the relatively easy ouster of the Taliban government has turned into a long and deadly struggle that's now taking more U.S. and allied lives than the war in Iraq. Now there's talk of both sending in more troops to Afghanistan and negotiating with elements of the Taliban. New York Times foreign correspondent John Burns recently returned from several weeks reporting in that country, and he joins me now. John, welcome back. What are U.S. commanders saying to you about their troop needs in Afghanistan?
Well, the needs are urgent and pressing. Unlike the situation in Iraq, where for at least 3 or 4 years, American commanders were very reluctant to say publicly what they were saying privately, which was that they needed more troops. In Afghanistan, General McKinnon, the commander there, and General Petraeus, who is to take over on Friday as the overall commander for the two wars, are saying very clearly they need more troops. They have 65,000 NATO troops, of whom about 33,000 American troops. If there's going to be a serious increment in those troops, they're unfortunately going to have to be American troops. The European allies, the principal European NATO allies, are simply very reluctant to deploy more troops, and especially to deploy more troops into the areas of most hazard.
Did they have a specific number of U.S. troops going in country in mind and a specific mission for them?
Well, General McKinnon said when he was back in Washington to see the president and discuss war strategy earlier in the month that he would like to see at least 3 more American combat brigades. He's been told he can have 1. That's something like 3,500 to 4,500 men by early next year, but that any increment beyond that will have to come later in the year and will depend on a troop drawdown in Iraq. The 2 wars are now very clearly linked in that respect.
Do the generals in Iraq, those running the American effort and telling you they need more troops, in effect waiting to see what happens November 4th, does the fate of those requests in some part rest on who's elected president next week?
I think the uncertainties about future American military strategy in Iraq than the uncertainties about Afghanistan. The principal difference, which I think would be evident to most Americans, would be that there has been a protracted debate in Iraq over the Iraq policy now for years. Should we stay, should we go? At least in mainstream American politics, as I judge it, from my time here in the United States in the last 10 days or so, it seems to me that the general view is that failure is not an option in Afghanistan. And of course that goes back to 9/11 and the recognition of where 9/11 came from Al-Qaeda in an Afghanistan ruled by the Taliban. And so it seems to me that all the main players here, and Senator Obama among them, are agreed that there may need to be more troops and more resources and more money and more aid money and a new war strategy in Afghanistan to prevail there.
Is the state of the mission, is the state of the pacification of the country different in Afghanistan from what it is today in Iraq? And you've spent a lot of time in both places. Maybe you could compare them.
Yes, I think it is. And of course it comes as a great surprise in a way for somebody who spent as long as I did, 5 years in Iraq, to see how quickly the situation in Afghanistan has deteriorated. And I think you could say that in some respects, parallels are a little misleading, but in some respects the situation in Afghanistan, and let's remember 7 years after the fall of the Taliban, looks a little bit like the situation in Iraq, shall we say, in late 2004 and early 2005, when all the indicators, all the indices, or as the military like to say, all the metrics are headed downward. The trends are not good. There is a need for more troops. There's need for a new war strategy. And the most optimistic estimates seem to be that even if more resources are dedicated, it may take 2 to 3 years to begin to turn this around.
Is that assessment, what you just said, the kind of thing that's leading people to talk openly about opening up channels to the Taliban?
It is, but I think we need to be very wary of that. Of course, if you could engage the Taliban in serious negotiations and bring this war to an end by those talks, nobody would oppose them. But at the moment, they haven't even had talks about talks. There's a lot of talk here and amongst diplomats about the need for talks. There are some very preliminary sorts of encounters, none of them substantial or substantive. The problem is this. The Taliban are, in fact, a divided organization to an extent. There are fissures within the Taliban. There are elements in the Taliban that are more militantly Islamist than others. There are other elements which are more nationalist than Islamist. There are fissures which go back to the old Mujahideen struggle against the Soviet occupation, rivalries between different commanders. All of this is true. But those rivalries and those fissures tend to lead in the direction of more radicalism. That's to say, people, if they start outbidding each other within the Taliban on this issue, they're likely to outbid each other in terms not of more accommodation towards the a negotiation and towards some settlement of this war, but to more militant positions. And still the dominant, at least ideological figure within the Taliban is Mullah Muhammad Omar, the leader of the Taliban, the man who as much as any founded the Taliban, succor to bin Laden, and who continues to declare on militant Islamist websites that he remains at one with Al-Qaeda. So that doesn't seem very promising to me.
What if you get out into the villages? What do people who have lived with the Taliban and in some cases suffered with the Taliban think about those kinds of ideas?
Well, there's some of the good news. I didn't travel very widely, but I did get outside of Kabul and I did go into villages. I went into a number of villages which had been destroyed by the Taliban shortly after they came to power in Kabul. And there and elsewhere I found the same truth. And by the way, it's essentially the same truth that we found in a like circumstance in Iraq. And that is to say, there are not demands for the withdrawal of American and NATO troops. Quite the contrary. People who lived under the Taliban, like people who lived under Saddam Hussein, do not want to go back to that brutality and repression. They want security. Above all, they want security, and they recognize that that is not likely to come by a drawdown or a retreat of foreign forces. So the notion that a foreign force is doomed to fail in Afghanistan, as we can see from history, you can make that argument, I think is, in this case, not applicable. They want security. They want a little bit more, if you will, moderation sometimes in the application of American and other NATO firepower. I'm talking about civilian casualties from bombings. That's true. But above all, what those people seem to want is they're very disappointed that their lives did not improve in terms of their standards of living, especially because of the years of drought. Food is very much more expensive, and the common complaint in those villages is that they are worse off now than they were 5 or 6, 7 years ago. That's going to be a difficult thing to turn around, an expensive thing to turn around, and all the more difficult for the fact that so much of the hinterland in Afghanistan, most of it indeed, south of the Hindu Kush, where the Pashtun tribes
I'm sorry, I have to break in there.
Predominate.
But thanks a lot for talking to us. Good to talk to you again. John Burns with us.
Thank you very much.
And finally tonight, more big changes in the world of old and new media. Jeffrey Brown has our media unit report.
A landmark legal settlement yesterday allows the internet search giant Google to continue its years-long project to scan books and make them available on the internet. Google will pay $125 million to settle 2 copyright suits brought by book publishers and authors. The deal will make it easier for all parties to profit from the digital versions of printed books. Google has already scanned 7 million texts, nearly 5 million of which were out of print. Everything from classics to esoteric science texts and how-to books on ancient trades. Until this settlement, users could only see parts of these scanned works unless the copyright holder let the entire work be viewed. That will now change for books that are out of print. But even as the deal points to a continued revamping of the world of books, including one where they're read on new devices like the Kindle, yesterday also brought still more tumult to another sector of the print world. Newspapers and magazines suffering from a decade-long drop in readership and advertising revenues are taking a new hit as the economy slows. Circulation at most major U.S. newspapers dropped nearly 5% from March to September, forcing more cuts. Gannett, the nation's largest newspaper company, announced yesterday it will lay off 10% of its workforce, some 3,000 employees. Time Inc. will give out 600 pink slips across its wide spectrum of magazines. The Star-Ledger of Newark, New Jersey will avoid ceasing operation altogether only by cutting its already thin editorial staff by 40%. And the Los Angeles Times yesterday announced yet another round of newsroom layoffs as its parent company, Tribune, seeks to cut costs further. The paper now has about half the newsroom staff it had in 2001. In perhaps the most dramatic move to date, the century-old Christian Science Monitor announced yesterday it would cease daily publication and migrate most of its publishing to the web, the first national newspaper to do so. It will still put out a weekly roundup. And we discuss the gains and losses of the changing media landscape now with Mark Glaser, editor of the Media Shift blog on PBS.org, where he writes on the intersection of media and technology, and Stephen Levy, who does the same as a senior writer at Wired magazine, and John Yema, editor of the Christian Science Monitor. Well, Stephen Levy, for those who haven't followed this fight between Google and the publishers, explain the importance of the settlement.
Well, Google had a really ambitious plan to digitize as many as possible of all the world's books. All the books ever written, essentially, is what they wanted to do. And the publishers and the authors objected to this because they felt that Google was illegally making copies of the books and not paying them. They wanted essentially a cut of the action. And that's what this 2-year negotiation was about. And the settlement actually turned out into something bigger. It does a few things. It enables Google to, as your reporter said, legally continue this activity. They've got 7 million books now. I think they want to go up to 20 million in the foreseeable future. And also, Google's now going to be a distributor of books for sale. They're going to set up a system by which authors and publishers can get paid when people want to view the books online there. So it really puts Google far, far ahead of its competitors in delivering probably was what the most significant corpus of information in the world is in human history, all the printed books.
And Mark Glaser, I mean, we talk so much about the changing economic model when we're talking about new media. How does this play into that? If you're an author, if you're a publisher, how does it change the economics?
Well, I think it significantly changes the economics because now if you're an author and you have out-of-print books, you might not have figured out a way to make money, and now through Google someone could be searching for something that happens to be inside your books, and it basically pulls up that copy. People can preview the book and then they'll be able to buy it. So it's really giving authors of out-of-print books and even authors of books that are in print another revenue stream, another way to make money. And it goes along with this kind of print on demand that we're starting to see, services like Amazon's Book Surge, where an author can basically publish their books themselves.
Isn't there a downside potentially, though, for an author that you put your work online and then you don't get the same amount of royalties that you might have gotten with a real book?
Well, actually, what's interesting is that you do get better royalties when you publish and you self-publish online. And in this case with Google, I believe it's a 60% plus royalty for the author, for the publisher. So I think online, you're actually being able to cut out some of the middlemen and go directly from the reader to the author without having to go through the layers of administration.
All right, we'll come back to some of the economics, but I want to bring John Yemme in because you're dealing with another part of this digital change. First, why is it impossible for the Monitor to continue as a newspaper of the kind that we can hold in our hand?
Well, the Monitor has a very large national circulation that's actually very small, I should say, 50,000, 52,000 readers scattered across the country. And the economics of delivery, of printing and delivery to them is it's very difficult for us and has been for decades, really. So the advent of the internet, where we've seen more people migrating to the web to get their news, just seemed to us to be an opportunity to reach people where they are.
Okay, it allows you to reach more people where they are, but does it allow you to get more money from those people to pay for the reporting and all the operations of a newspaper?
Well, I mean, our plan is to move towards sustainability, and the way that we think we can do that is by having a mix of publications. We have a weekly print publication that will debut in the spring. We have more energy that we'll have on our website now because we'll be able to devote our reporting and editing resources directly to the website. That in turn should make our website, csmonitor.com, a destination and it should increase traffic. That should increase revenue. I know it's a tough economic environment. We also have an email news summary that we'll be putting out every day that will be a subscription product. So within these 3 editions of the Monitor, we think that mix will bring in enough revenue and cut enough costs that will reach sustainability in 3 to 5 years.
Well, Stephen, let me bring you back on. How do you think about the pluses and minuses of the economics here, whether it's books or newspapers?
Well, they have different models. Books, as we know and enjoy, don't have ads stuck in the middle there. That's not the business plan for books. So it's pretty nice to be able to shift that over to the web and see money for it. Now, Google actually is going to get some advertising money because in the pages you use to preview to see what's in the book, Google's going to be able to run ads in that. For something like a newspaper or a magazine, things are much tougher because the business model depends on a certain kind of advertising that works well in print but has not worked well on the web. So when the place is considering advertising on the web, they're more likely to use the kind of ads that Google sells, which is ads that are tied to search, and they target them to keywords in search, as opposed to putting ads on a page alongside an article there. So I think it's tough sledding for newspapers and magazines in general. Before I was at Wired, I worked for a weekly magazine for 12 years, and let me tell you, weekly magazines are no picnic either.
Mark Glaser, same question. How do you see the pluses and minuses? Stay on the journalism side here of newspapers and magazines.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people talk about this gloom and doom among journalism and how we're going to really lose serious journalism, and I don't think we're going to lose serious journalism. I think what we're seeing is a change in business models, and I think what the Christian Science Monitor is admitting is that going online is really the way to start thinking about new ways of making money, whether that's online advertising, like Stephen said, Google controls a lot of that, or whether it's subscriptions like the Wall Street Journal is doing online, or even nonprofits like ProPublica or NPR, even PBS right here. These are all different models that people are trying for, plus there are experimental ways that journalists are trying to make money going directly to the public for funding, what they're calling crowdfunding, a site called spot.us, which allows people in a community to actually fund the journalist directly without the overhead of a news organization.
Well, John Yema, I know you worked at the Boston Globe, and you certainly know the industry well. What about the quality question? I mean, even if you can put out more information to many more people from different sources, what about maintaining the kind of standards of quality?
Well, you know, your standards start with your standards, and the Christian Science Monitor for 100 years has had a certain set of standards that's trying to reach people who want to understand the world, not unlike PBS viewers, people who, and our foreign bureaus, our national bureaus, we all have this drive to understand the world and to convey that in a non-sensationalistic way. So 100 years of that is the development of some pretty strong standards. We think we can take those onto the web, and indeed, for the past 10 years, like every newspaper, we've been on the web, but now we can unshackle ourselves from the constraints of print and devote our time and attention directly to the web, which frankly will help us develop, you know, the right kind of journalism for the web, we think, and you know, fly our flag there.
Well, Stephen Levy, you know, everyone's wondering where this is all going. How much do we already know about changing reading habits already? How many people, is it generational, the way we often hear about who's reading the newspaper online, the introduction of the Kindle I mentioned as a new way of reading books? How much do we know about how many changes have occurred already?
Well, we do know that, as you mentioned, there is a big generational difference between younger and older people in reading habits. People complain that young people don't read, but they do read quite a lot. They read a lot on the web. And they don't support the same kind of publications that their parents read, because by getting on the web and by grazing, read an article here or read an article there, they have a different kind of experience there. And to be honest, it is somewhat worrisome for the kind of really serious, in-depth journalism that some of the great institutions, that we know of, have been, going on for, and delivering us for years. When you surf on the web, you get distracted very easily. You look at the top most read articles in a lot of the websites, and it's not the ones that are the in-depth investigations, but it's an article about Britney Spears or something like that, or cheerleaders, or a dog that got lost, which tops the story about the investigation in your local community, or a national story.
All right, well, to be continued on the business, on the standards, and all those questions. Stephen Levy, Mark Glaser, and John Yema, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Again, the major development of this day, the Federal Reserve cut a major interest rate by another ½ point, but a Wall Street rally about it faded. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening. I'm Jim Lara. Thank you and good night.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lara is provided by...
With soaring energy prices and global climate change, there are good reasons for believing in wind. Wind energy is clean and plentiful, and it answers the call for sustainable ways to create the electricity we need. We know because our sole focus is developing technology that uses the energy of the wind to generate electricity. America has some of the world's most abundant wind resources, and Vestas is here to help harness them.
Pacific Life. Chevron.
At both big stores, Crown Carpets.
Kate Brown has the right experience and is best prepared to be Oregon's Secretary of State. Brown offers bipartisan leadership to get our economy moving again. And she'll conduct rigorous audits to make sure tax dollars are spent on our priorities. And Kate Brown cracked down on initiative fraud and will make sure those who break election laws are prosecuted.
Under my watch, we'll always have elections you can trust.
Kate Brown for Secretary of State.
That's awesome.
Very attractive.
I love it. Lots of room back there in the back. Yeah, it's got all kinds of room in it, man.
We drove it down a huge mountain. It's still as smooth as can be. Loads of power.
Heavy, top of the line.
Can't even feel the trailer back there.
Go, 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 go!
In tough times like these, do we want to give more power to Wall Street and big corporations? Measure 64 would do just that. Bill Sizemore put a loophole in 64 that would increase the power of lobbyists and corporate special interests while hurting the people we trust and depend on the most. Measure 64 would silence the voices of our nurses, firefighters, and teachers, but let Wall Street banks and lobbyists off the hook. Say no to Bill Sizemore's deceptive corporate loophole. Vote no on Measure 64.
K2 News, first at 4, weekday afternoon.